Hello and welcome back. So this is a follow-up to a previous session that demoed what was basically a manual integration of AI CodeGen into a low-code environment. In this session, we're going to see an actual direct integration of AI CodeGen with with the low code environment of the Solvent platform. So we now have an actual direct integration. It's under the BotWorks menu. If you go here, BotWorks, you have a bunch of options here. First, I'll go through the configuration and walk through because the configuration basically drives the whole thing and walk through what that looks like. So this pulls up the configuration object. This is just another Solvent object. If you're not familiar with what they are, go to the website and look up configure. The configure product talks about it. This object is specific to the AI plugin, which is this plugin, and this is it's stored here. It's user specific, so for the user that logs in, they get a copy of it directly, which they can then set up. All right, so we have our basic configuration here. You can ignore this. This really has to do with the UI, um, which you can mess around with if you wanted to. It's not advisable, but it's there. There's some element of the UI that you can change. You have prompts. These are, of course, the AI prompts. You have sessions, which basically just represent working sessions. If you think about, say, a chat window with a bot, um, each chat window you can think of as a session. So this gives you the ability to create as many of them. Um, you have the provider configuration, which is just a list of available AIs. If we open that up, by default, we have OpenAI, Anthropic, and Gemini integrated. Those are kind of the three main APIs currently. Um, you can integrate your own custom integration. You can add your own to it, and I'll show where you can do that. If you open one of these, you'll see some settings in here. It identifies the name of the provider, and there is the credential, which is the main thing that you need here to access it. Here you have your API key. It's advisable to encrypt it. This one is encrypted, and you can. There is an encryption utility here. If you open this up, put your secret in here, you can encrypt it and then paste it in here. This is not really used directly by itself, but it does give you a list of the available model for each provider. You can use this within the integration. I'll get to how that's done. This object represents the actual API call. You can have presets in here, or you can even have dynamically integrated values in here. So the same setup for all three of them. They all use the same kind of construct, so you don't have to learn something new for each one. Inside shared, you have a bunch of things in here. For code, this gives you a mechanism for plugging into the AI integration. Right. So let's open this up. Um, Here, for instance, this first one, this is JavaScript that can get run whenever you run a prompt. And this is the server one is an example of backend code that can get run again whenever you integrate, whenever you call the AI. There are various ways that you can plug into that process and without having to do a whole lot of work. So let's open up The prompts, these are predefined prompts. You can create as many of them as possible. Let's open up an example here. This is a prompt that's supposed to create a Vue application, Vue.js application for us. And I'll, by the end of this video, I'll run through a few examples. Um, this should really be deleted for most of this stuff. It gets automatically added by the product. And I've noticed it does create some problems. So if you see that in there, just remember to remove it. Here, you have the prompt. Here's the actual prompt text. Um, you can parameterize the prompt. And here it allows you to provide data before you run the prompt. Think of it as an argument that you pass to the prompt. It gets integrated into the prompt. Uh, Here, for instance, we have the component library that we want to use for this prompt. When you replace this with a different component library, before this prompt gets run, it basically gets run. It's just a JavaScript eval that replaces all these values for you. And I'll show you the part of the code that does this. So you have full control over this. You can control how it gets applied, and you can even change the actual JavaScript that does the replacement for you. So that's your prompt. Then you have the API request that I showed on the provider side of things. You can think of this as the default one that maybe applies if you have settings that you want to apply for everything for a given provider, like a temperature setting or some other settings specific to the API. You can do that. And then you have part prompt settings, which you can also set to control specific prompt settings. So for instance, here we have references to tool, which makes sense. For the tool call, you can specify a given tool for a given prompt. Here you have references to the tools that are defined under your shared resources. So we have a bunch of tools defined here, and then we're referencing it here. Again, it gives you a very scalable way to work with this stuff. Um, and then we have the processing, pre and post processing things that I mentioned. Here you have a setting that says client preprocessor. This basically just says when you submit a prompt, before the prompt actually gets sent to the AI on the browser side of things, run this code. Right? When we open this up, there's a simple JavaScript function that calls eval. It gets a bunch of objects. This is a kind of God object that's used to expose various plugins on the front end of the product. I'll show you examples of how that gets used to drive automation on the front end, and a bunch of other things. You have the config. This config is this object that you get, so you get access to all the information in here programmatically. So, for instance, config that's shared. It's literally this, that code, that prepare, which will get evaluated. So before, when I show the UI, you'll see when you click submit prompt, this can get called. It's up to you. You get to configure it if you want that functionality. Same deal with the post processing. After it gets the prompt is executed by the AI and brings back a result, and you want to process it, you have a way to do that here. Similarly, on the back end, there is a way to invoke back end code when before the AI gets called, you can run code. Here, there's nothing happening, but you could do other things. You can mess around with the prompt further on the back end. Let's say you want to extract data from your environment, from your developer environment, and integrate it directly into your prompt. This might be a good place to do this. Here, you should see an example where the code is directly embedded. So you run this code here. This is a Groovy code. But you could actually reference code that's on the file system, so you can put the full path of your code in here instead of referencing an object that's a dynamically evaluated object. The post processing, this gets called after the AI comes back with your response. If I open this up, This one actually has a ton of code in here, which does things that we want the AI response to apply to. Um, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but once I do the demo, you'll see that all the automation is driven by code that's in here. So, for instance, when the tool call comes back, here we have save app as an example of a tool call when we send the request to generate an application for us. That tool is defined here, and this is our processing, right? It's if you're familiar with the APIs, you'll see this looks familiar. It gets function arguments and all of that, and we're going to use it to drive automation. We get a path to the file on the file system. We get file content. We get we create the file, save it to the file system, which is basically this is an API that gives you access to your developer environment. So all the stuff that's happening here is what a user would ordinarily have to do manually. So if you saw the first session, I was doing this manually. When I run this demo, this is going to get automated. Here we get the actual low code um, importation happening, where we take the output that we get from the AI and convert it into a low code format so that we can work on it in a low code fashion. And then a bunch of other things here to return response to the AI. It expects when you make a tool call, it expects it to respond with some kind of result that it can work off of. Um, this code is entirely just the specific implementation. You can replace this with anything else that you want, right? So it's highly pluggable. Uh, Also, in this code, at least the approach that we took is to use the OpenAI API format for everything. And inside the implementations for the various providers for Anthropic and for Gemini, we basically we adapt the objects that get sent back so that they work for those APIs. Um, we are unfortunately in a situation that's similar to the cloud providers where they all have different API structures, data formats, um, which unfortunately means that we're probably going to end up with a million startups whose job it is to convert lowercase to uppercase. Um, but this example handles that for you at least for the basic cases where we standardize on the open API format and then we adapt it. You can use the specific provider format. It's up to you, but for this code example, we just standardize on that one format and then convert it accordingly. All right, so just as you have back end processing example here, I'll show on the front end there is a similar ability to tap into the AI response and and drive automation. So we saw an example of the back end. Let me say so. This for the the back end example shows content coming back from the AI and you saving that. Now let's show the front end here, which we call low code app maker that handles front end related stuff. Um, Again, this is code that you can replace. It's all pluggable. So here we have a bunch of code, just like with the backend form of it. Here's the same type of code, except this one is in JavaScript. And then we have that God object that I mentioned, which are basically these are the innards of the platform on the front end of things. It can't really call it an API, but it does give you the ability to plug automation into the front end. You basically drive things that the user would have to do manually. You can drive it through these APIs. Over time, the plugins will evolve to have more ergonomic APIs. Right now, these are fairly ugly, but it's what's available, and you can use them. So here we have a bunch of calls that allows us to ultimately open up the result um, in the Lowcodr environment. So this is just a reflection of here's a backend version of the code in Groovy. Yeah, literally this the one in Groovy on the backend, one in JavaScript on the front end. So a great deal of flexibility of plugging into the AI setup without you having to do a whole lot of work. So there's a lot more in here, but I think that gives you an idea of the structure of the AI integration. So this is what the AI integration uses. Now let's see some examples of actually trying to use this stuff. We're going to create open AI bot. That's going to be the session. Create that. And create our session. Let's say hello to our bot friend. Okay. Create another session. This one for Anthropic. All right. We'll create a third one for Gemini. All right. So we have three sessions here. You can have a million sessions. Basically, each session just represents work that you're doing. You can get access to any session's actual data by going to configure session. Now that you've created these sessions, you have access to their configuration and it'll open up in here. There's no the prompt that we have in here that we just ran. All that information is available here. If you run into problems or there are errors or you want to see what's happening, you can take a look at this output and you know determine what's going on. All right, so we have this. Let's try to run some prompts. I showed you the predefined prompt. We entered prompts here without using the predefined prompts, but we can use a predefined prompt here. So let's try to create our first low code app drive. I showed you, let's see, let's open up the prompt here so you can see. This is not really, so the prompt window here, as you can see, it's fairly small. You can expand it to make it a little easier to use. But the idea is that if you really are creating like a significant prompt as one that you would need to create an application, then you want to use this editor because it's meant for that. So the same stuff that we have here, it's here. So if I wanted to change this to a different framework, well, I'll replace this here and that will parameterize the prompt and that information will get used. For our prompt here, we've defined valid tags because if you try to just tell it to use tags to create an application for a given framework, if it doesn't have enough information, it will just make stuff up. So we have a set of tags that we've extracted from our low code implementations, and that's part of the configuration here. So if you open this up, you'll see let's open up these tags. We currently have integrations for these UI frameworks, so we can use them. If I open this up, it tells you all the components that are available, and we're integrating that directly into our prompt to guide the AI so that it doesn't, go in and just make stuff up. So with all of this, let's try to actually create an application now in an automated fashion. Um, in this prompt, I think I have, so I'm currently pointing to this location as the place that to save data to. Not actually sure it's not doesn't currently exist. So let's create it just to avoid. I think it should auto create it, but I'm not sure. Let's see, Solvent test. Create that folder just to be sure. Okay. So when the AI comes back with its output, we should see stuff in here. Without further ado, let's do this. Click here. This is how you execute the prompt. There's no streaming available here. All right. So this is, I think we've run into my first bug here. This is a back end issue. All right. I'm going to cut this video short from this point, and there will be a second one once we tackle that particular problem.